Hey guys, and welcome to Syntho. In this video we're going to be taking a look at how you can design some really cool dubby sounds exactly in the style of the label Berg Audio. So this is a really cool dub techno inspired label that takes on a more housey side, and there's some really cool sounds within this label. So hopefully this video will show you how you can get some really cool stabs and synth sounds which add so much movement and interesting character to your music. So let's take a listen to the general sound that we're going to be going for. So you can hear lots of reverb, lots of effects, lots of call and response, and all these cool, unique sounding dub stabs. So let's start by just taking a listen in solo to these dub stabs, and you can get a real good feel for the intricacies that are going on. So as you can see, there's a lot of different intricate sounds going on here. But once you've got the basis of understanding how to create stabs like this, then really the thing that ties it all together and makes it sound like one cohesive sound is in the effects. And you'll see that it's going to be a lot of echoes and a lot of reverbs and a lot of automation within those effect sounds as well. So as you can see, we've got 5 different stab sounds here. And you can really do as many as you want, and they can all serve different roles. Like one can be the main one, then a secondary one, then just one that comes in every so often, and they can all be based around the same sort of chord, and you can add extra notes onto that chord here and there. So let's start with this one here, which is actually my 3rd stab, but it's kind of the main stab in this groove. So let's take a listen to this from here. Sounds really cool, epic and juicy. So obviously, like I say, there's a lot of effects going on here. So what we'll do is we'll start by muting all of the effects so that we can start from a dry sound and you can see how it builds up to something more. So this sound coming straight out of the synth sounds like this. But already it's got so much movement just from the synth itself. So let's take a look at how you can create a nice juicy stab sound like this. So I'm using Wavetable for this because, as you'll know, I think that it's a really versatile synth and it excels at doing these cool Lush stab sounds. So we can start with the first oscillator here, and we're going to choose a sawtooth. We're then going to move over to the second, and we'll choose a sawtooth again, but just to separate it a little bit from the first, you can actually just move the waveform up a little bit so that it becomes basically in between a square and a saw. We can then detune it, and this is going to help give us more of a lush sound straight away. And by doing these little intricate steps as we go along, we're just building the sound up to be really lush. So that's the sound pretty much with an open filter and just the detuned oscillator. So then, to get this sound to be more of a stab sound and have a little bit of movement, we need to move over to the filter. So with the filter here, what I've done is I've set up two different filters. So filter number 1 here is a low pass filter. It's on 24 dB and it's on the clean mode here. We can start by adding quite a lot of resonance and then set the filter cutoff to be around 100 Hertz. Then we can move over to filter number 2, which is going to be a high pass filter. And this is just going to save us from doing any EQing later just by clearing out some of the low end here. So you can set that to around 120 Hertz. We can then move over to the envelopes here. Now, I've found that with these kind of sounds, a bit of a softer attack works well. You might think that because it's a stabby sound, you want it to be the fastest attack possible. But sometimes that can be a little bit harsh and you can get a smoother, more warm sound by softening the attack a little bit. You can leave these pretty much at default for a longer stab sound like this. Then what we want to do is move over to the matrix and start adding some envelope to filter 1 here. So I've chose around 48 here. We can then go back to the mod sources and start shaping this envelope. You can have it as short or as long as you want, just depending on how it's going to fit into your track. And because this is the kind of first sound that kicks in with the beat, as you can hear, it happens on the first beat of the bar. I've gone for a longer sound because I want it to have quite a lot of impact. So I've also chosen quite a long chord here. And we'll return to the chord in a minute and I'll show you some good chords that you can choose. So then, where does the movement come from in this sound? I found out recently that I think one of the best ways of doing this is not necessarily by using an LFO on the filter, but by drawing in your own filter movements with automation. So as you can see here, I've done some quite weird kind of filter automation here. And this is just on the filter cutoff. So I'm basically adding in my own LFO, which is moving the filter. And of course, this can be done like by hand if you've got a MIDI controller using a knob or a slider. And that can help get some really natural movement into the sound. But you can also just draw it in like I've done here. So as you can see, this shape here is going to move the filter. So if we just set the filter to one fixed point by taking off the automation like this, it sounds nice and simple because we've got a little bit of the filter opening with the envelope. But as soon as we start drawing in some automation like this, you can see we're getting that movement that we've drawn in ourselves, and we can customize that to however we want it to be. So you can see I've got one bit of automation here, but then the second time this happens, it's slightly different. And again, here it's slightly different. And then here again. So every time it's slightly different. And that is just going to add so much like unpredictability to your music and just really engage the listener. And of course, it works really well for when you're creating breakdowns and build-ups, because you can customize how much you want the filter to open and how you want the stab to sound. At the moment, obviously, it sounds really cool because we've got some movement in there. We've got it to sound quite juicy, but we need to start adding some effects. So I like to use, on dub stabs like these, I like to use dual filters. My preferred way of doing that is by using Soundtoy's Filter Freak here. And as you can see, this filter shape here is moving quite a bit already. So what I like to do is I like to use two band pass filters here. I like them set at 4 poles and then with quite a bit of resonance. And then you can basically use an LFO now at a rate of probably like 1 bar or 2 bar, depending on how fast you want it. Send a little bit of it here, so about 50 here. And then we're going to get even more movement. And these dual filters here create a really cool kind of phase sound that suits this dub techno inspired house so much. So again, let's take that filter freak off. It sounds great, but it hasn't got as much character as when you add these dual filters. And obviously, if we change these dual filters, cut off points here, we get different sounds. And because we've got a little bit of movement as well, again, it's just going to be unpredictable. So then we can use a chorus plugin. I've chose Microshift for this. We're just adding so many layers of movement here. So obviously at this point, you might be thinking, well, where's the ambience coming from? Like, how are we going to get it to sound super lush and dubby? Well, that comes from the reverbs and echoes here. For this particular sound and quite a lot of the other stabs that I'm going to show you, I've created this return channel here called Dubverb. So this is simply a really long reverb, and I like to use Valhalla Vintage Verb for this because it's very lush sounding and it's very thick sounding, so it just works great for these big long reverbs. Then you can take it a little bit further by sidechaining the reverb channel to the kick, and this is just going to add a layer of groove because the reverb channel itself is actually going to pump a little bit with the kick, and I really like the sound of that. If I was to exaggerate that, I think it sounds really cool. And when you've got multiple different reverbs together, it's just going to help them not overwhelm the mix as much. So then other effects which are going to make this sound even better is some echo. Then what I've done as well is I've added another reverb. This time it's even longer. So as you can see here, it's now 6 seconds instead of 4. So that's just because in the mix, I felt that it needed some more lushness, some more reverb. So I just added another one. And because this is a longer reverb, we can then, in the breakdowns, for example, we can automate that reverb. So if we just play this with our drums, we can listen to how this is building up in this breakdown. So could you hear that reverb coming up just a little bit? So that's why it's good to have an extra long reverb. And obviously you could make this even longer if you wanted to and use it more just in the breakdowns to build up the dub stabs. But as you'll see, these effects are important because there's a lot of automation going on within them, and it's going to really help make the track really interesting and especially good for breakdowns. So for this stab here as well, we've also got a third echo. So with this third echo now, I've mainly used this in the breakdown. So again, let's play this breakdown. So already it's sounding so cool with just one sim sound because we've added in so much movement using the intricate filter automation and these reverbs and delays. You've got so much potential for what you can do with just this one sound. So before I show you the other stabs, let's take a look at this chord here. So I found that for this sort of sound, a good chord to use is essentially a basic minor chord. In this case, we're in A minor, so we've got A, C, and E. Then you can add a note, in this case the G, which is basically 2 semitones below the root note. So if we're working in A minor and our root note is therefore A, if we go down 2 semitones we get a G, And you can put this G wherever you want. You can put it up top like this for a little bit more of a brighter sound, or you can have it below, which is my preference, for a more deeper sound. So let me show you the importance of this extra G note. If we take out the G, it's got a different feel. It's a little bit more moody and perhaps too dark. But adding this G in just makes it a little bit more kind of dancey and a little bit brighter. You can take it further by adding a seventh here, which in this case would be a B. And again, you could have this below if you wanted to. And then really you can start adding in even more notes in the key. And they're all going to give different feels. But my preference is essentially that 4-note chord, with the 4th note being 2 semitones below the root note. So as you'll see now that we're going to move on to the other stabs, this same basic 4-note chord is going to work for most of our track, with the addition of completely different chords here and there, which is just going to help add a little bit of a different vibe to your track.
Join the next generation of house music creators with Syntho. It's time to take your music production to the next level. We've got everything from in-depth beginners courses to advanced mixing techniques. Syntho is your all-encompassing music education platform. Learn from some of the hottest world touring DJs. It's your chance to unlock house music secrets from industry professionals. Get one-on-one feedback on your music with Syntho's bespoke feedback system.
These guys aren't biased for your track. They will tell you what you need and when you need it.
Use this to make fully finished tracks to send to labels and artists. It's now time for you to reach for the labels of your dreams. Get access to your favorite artists, tailored learning paths, and learn anytime. Head to our website now and turn your house music dreams into a reality.
So essentially now we've got our first stab, which is happening on the first beat. So now we need to start getting in some responses and different calls and different chords which are going to integrate with those first ones to create a different groove and more melody in your track. So let's take a look at this second chord here. And this time it's a bit more of a shorter, snappier kind of chord. Again, already I'm using the same effects that I've created on the return channel because that's going to tie all these chords together. And again, this is a very similar sound, but this time we're doing a much shorter sound. So already I've done that just by making these MIDI notes here a lot shorter, and you can take that even further by making it even shorter here. And then of course the envelopes are going to be different as well. So we've got a much kind of snappier envelope here, and this time we're also just using one oscillator instead. So really it's up to you now how you change this sound, but I've tried to keep them kind of similar but just different shapes of filter and different amp envelopes as well. So that means that my sounds are going to gel together nicely. And again, we've got a similar thing going on here with Filter Freak and Microshift. So as you can see, we're using the same bandpass filters here, but at different frequencies now. Without this Filter Freak. It doesn't sound as lush. And again, what I've done also is I've done a little bit of my own filter shaping here with automation, like I did with this other stab here. I'm again doing it to this stab. So for example, you could make this like this, or you could get really intricate and do something like this. And obviously it's going to change the sound completely, but you've got so much freedom in how you want it to sound, instead of just using the filter envelope within the synth and it being stuck at that same envelope every time the chord hits. And by doing these little intricate things, it's going to really help these stabs sound professional and stand out. Now for this stab as well, we're using a slightly different echo on a different return channel. Again, just to separate it from this first stab. Can you see it's got a faster echo? And as you can see, we're starting to build up a little call and response pattern here. Might be easier to hear with the kick. And again, as you can see, when the track builds up, I'm doing some extra bits of movement here with the automation. So sometimes the stab is more subdued and sometimes it's brighter. And in the intro of this track, you can see that I've used this stab to build up the track by having it really soft and subdued. And there in that new section, after the 8 bars, it starts to become a bit brighter. So I'm using these bits of automation here to shape the track, to almost give it a melody of its own, but only using automation, not necessarily by changing the notes of the chord. But speaking of the notes of the chord, as you'll see, like I said before, I'm using a different note here, extra. So instead of it just being the same chord as the first stab like this, I'm adding that B in there, and that changes the feel completely. But essentially, if you think about it, the basis of that chord is still the A minor. So those two synths are now really going to fit well with each other. So as you can see now, we've got 3 more stabs. So a little pattern is building up here now where we're adding more and more to fill these gaps. And each time the stabs are going to be based upon the same basic synth sound using the wavetable, and I slightly tweak them just by changing the oscillators and by changing how the filter sounds. So now we've got this other one in. And if we play this with our first 2, this one here is like kind of a really lightweight one. But again, same principles apply. I'm using automation to shape how these dub stabs sound with every single stab. So we could do something like this. As you can hear, you can almost create a groove using automation that can get really intricate. And again, that's really just going to add so much of a professional sound, and people will be able to tell that you've taken a lot of time to go into the intricate details. And again, the same things apply. I'm using the same return channels that are going to gel everything together on this other stab. So then as the track progresses, we're going to add another stab in here. So let's play these 4 together now. And with this stab, again, using wavetable, working with the same basic sound, using a different oscillator here. We're also using Filter Freak 2 again. And just listen to how good this makes it sound. This is without the Filter Freak. sounding good, but this just takes it to the next level. And if we were to increase this modulation here, we're going to get even more movement on this filter. So each and every stab that I've created here has got its own unique movement, and that's super important. So if you are into these sort of dubby sounds, then this one plugin, Filter Freak 2, is going to really help you, just because of the cool dual filters that it's got and the little bits of movement you can add in there and the almost phaser sound that you can get with it. And again, I'm using the same return channels, all at different levels for each one of these stabs, which is just going to help tie it all together, like I say. And with this stab here, you can see there's a lot more chords in this one. And again, they're really short and snappy. And you can see that how the chord changes to start adding in a little bit of variation within the melody. For example, here I use the D instead of the E. And again, it's just filling in the gaps with the rest of these chords to create call and response. So with the rest of our track now, it's starting to sound really cool with just 4 stab sounds. So now in this little breakdown here, we're actually going to bring in one more stab. So in total, we've got 5. And this one is really cool, the way that it comes in. So let's play that on its own. And as you can hear, obviously, without the other stabs playing, it kind of sounds a bit disjointed because it hasn't got the other stabs to suggest the rhythm and to give it the call that it needs, because essentially this is a response sound now. But then as soon as you start adding in the call, it starts to make sense. So again, same things apply here. It's essentially the same basic sound with different wave shapes here and slightly different filter shapes. And again, I'm using this really amazing filter here. And as you can see, the LFO on this filter is actually moving a lot slower now at 4 bars. So because this stab is quite sparse anyway, it's played over the length of 4 bars here. We're just getting a really nice slow movement. So nothing too crazy, but it means that every single time that stab happens, there's a little bit of a different filter sound. And again, I'm just fitting in that sound here using the same chords, but at just different positions so that it creates a call and response and a groove. So many different Lush sounds there working together. So then really you can then group everything together and start processing these stabs as one and get some effects in there that make them gel together and sound like a cohesive sound. So how can we process all of these stabs together as a whole? Well, first up, what I like to do is take out the low end, because there's so much lushness going on here and so many rich chords. You don't really need all of that low end because it's going to get in the way of the bass. I then like to sidechain it to my kick because that's going to help these stabs pump a little bit, like we did with the reverb earlier. And then to get a little bit more of a crunchy sound, a little bit more old school sounding, and take the edge off these stabs, we can use something like Decapitator from Sound Toys or Ableton Saturator. Then what I found was that I wanted all of these sounds to gel together and kind of sound like they were all coming from one place. So I did that just by adding this reverb here on the insert. And you'll notice with these dubby sounds, you can't really have enough reverb. So an extra reverb on the insert of the group here isn't doing us any harm. So as you can see here now, this is just going to gel them all together. And we've got potential now to automate it even more. So let's play this whole track together. And what you'll see is this decay time on this Valhalla vintage verb building up in the breakdown. Then what I've done is just some simple mixing by just taking away a little bit of the low mids here with a low shelf, because there's quite a lot of them and they're so rich. It's kind of similar to what I did to the EQ down here, but just a little bit extra. Then we can use a glue compressor, which is doing a lot of compression, but only at 25% dry wet here. And this is almost like parallel compression, and it's just going to help our synth stabs gel together and pop out the mix a little bit. Then for automation purposes, I've added a auto filter to the whole group here. And what this is doing is, in this breakdown here, it's sloping down. So if I play it from here, everything's going to get a little bit deeper and a little bit warmer, then it's going to open up again. Then to finish off, I'm using this really amazing Ableton plugin called Dynamic Tube. This is just going to add a little bit of analog grit to it and a little bit of warmth. It's similar to Decapitator and similar to Saturator, but it's just a little bit of a different character that you're getting. So one more thing as well, like I was saying before, we don't really want to go crazy with the different chords, but you can start to move away from that A minor chord. If the whole track is using that basis of the A minor, then it might get a little bit boring. In the key of A minor, there is also other chords, obviously. So this one here now, we've got an E minor, which is an E, a G, and a B. So just listen to how this now suddenly takes the track to another level. It's a completely different chord, and it's just going to make it jump out a little bit and just add a little bit more musicality and a little bit more melody. And again, we've done the same thing here later on down the line at the end of this progression. So I'd say like a maximum of 2 different types of chords. And in this track, I've chose A minor and E minor, and I find that they work really well together. So altogether, in the end, after all these different layers of automation and filters, echoes and reverbs, you can get a really lush, dubby sound. So with this video, you're also going to get this project, which has got all of the other sounds in here with the drums and with the bass as well. so that you can take a little look into what else makes this sound. If you don't have the Soundtoys Filter Freak, then you could also attempt to use Ableton's phaser to get a similar effect, but it won't work as well. So as I say, if you're really into this sound, then a dual filter like the Filter Freak is going to really help you get there. So guys, thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think and have fun with the project. I'll see you on the next video. Take care, guys.